I was looking through an old issue of Photoshop User magazine from a few years ago and saw this technique and reminded me what a neat idea it is. I'm using an image from Mark Hunt. This is he has a great collection of hand-painted textures, and you can check them out at markhuntbackdrops.com. So thanks, Mark. And what I'm going to do here is try and make this look more like a studio backdrop where it's actually hanging and is on the floor, not just hanging in the background. So first of all, if you've watched my movies before, you'll know that the first thing I like to do is to duplicate the background layer. That's just me. I just like to do that as a backup plan. Not really necessary, but not a bad theory either. And I'm going to zoom out my view a little bit just so I can see a little bit of my workspace around the outside. And you'll see why in a moment that becomes useful. So the next thing we need to do is to select an area. And this part you'll have to experiment, but generally it's a little less than third. The bottom third or so is what the part we want to select. Then we're going to press Control T on Windows, Command T on the Macintosh for free transform, and hold down the following keys: Shift Control Alt on the PC, Shift Command Option on the Macintosh, and pull either corner way out to the side like this. And this is going to help create the illusion of the backdrop actually moving out towards us, towards the side. So at this point, do not deselect because we need to select the inverse. Now we need to feather this, and the quickest way, I'm on the PC, so I would just right click. On Mac I could control click and choose feather. We want to use a fairly high amount, click OK, and then use levels. So Control L on PC, Command L on the Macintosh, and just darken up that hanging part of the backdrop. Now the next step is an optional one. I like to do this. I find it makes just a little bit of a difference, is to make a fairly skinny selection. You'll have to sort of eyeball this and say, I want to try to select roughly where we're going to suggest that it turns from the hanging part to the floor. And again, a little bit of feathering, not as much in this case, maybe 8. And then levels again, and again just darken that just a little bit further. So it just helps create the illusion of coming down to the floor and then coming out towards us. Now at this point we need to put something or someone onto the background. So I'm going to use this young lady who we've already selected, and we're just going to drag and drop. And as you can see, as we've talked about before, a bit of a fringe happening, and that's not uncommon, so we'll deal with that in a second. First of all, I'm going to free transform. I'm holding down Alt or Option so I scale towards the middle, and Shift to try and keep it proportional. Try and get it right about the size I want. That's pretty good. Hit Enter, and then we can zoom in and out to see more clearly what we're working with. Now we need to deal with the bit of a fringe we have happening here. We've talked about that in other movies, but we'll just go over it real quick. You hold down Control on PC or Command on the Macintosh and click once on the layer. Go to the Select menu, choose Modify Contract by 1 pixel, select Inverse, and then Delete. Now we could also have tried Defringe, but in this case I already did, so I know that this just works a little better. Okay. Now we need to make this look a little more realistic, like she's actually standing there. So a couple things we could do. I'm going to add a new layer below her, and I held down Control or Command when I clicked on the new layer icon, and we're going to very simply, first of all, just make kind of a little blob with some pretty heavy feathering. Don't worry if we get that message. That just means you can't actually see the idea, but it'll still work. We're going to fill it with black and then lower the opacity down, just so there's sort of an area that we can kind of see. Now, I want to make a more specific shadows here, because in a studio, of course, the chances are there are going to be more than one lighting source. So we're going to, oops, cancel that. Wrong keyboard shortcut. Duplicate our girl. Oops, hold on a second. I have to make sure it's deselected. There we go. Now, duplicate her and fill with black. So I'm using Alt-Shift backspace on PC or Option-Shift delete on the Mac to fill, preserving transparency. Command-T for transform, and I'm going to hold down the Control key, which lets me pull out at an angle to make kind of a cast shadow idea. And of course we can reposition that a little bit. Take my Move tool and just try and move it up. Of course it needs to be behind. And we need to lower the opacity a fair bit to make it look more shadow-like. We can try changing the blending mode to multiply. I don't know if it'll make that much of a difference in this case, but what will make a difference, of course, would be blurring it. So Gaussian blur, find that thing and just blur it just a little more so it's not quite so obvious, and then we'll repeat the same operation. We could probably just copy the shadow, but just to be safe, I'm going to make a whole new one just to make sure I don't make any kind of error, and we're just going to make a little shadow off this way, slightly different angle, not quite as much. And again, lower the opacity, probably even more. Apply the same Gaussian blur filter just so there's a very slightly noticeable, and again, we can use that multiply idea. So there you go, and it's a very simple way to go from just what looked like a hanging backdrop, like this, into a studio backdrop complete with a model.